Somewhere in the middle of the Caribbean Sea, 3 days from the nearest port, a 68-year-old man from Ohio doesn't wake up from his afternoon nap. His wife calls the front desk. A medical team arrives within minutes, and the ship, carrying 5,800 passengers and crew, doesn't slow down, doesn't turn around, barely flinches. What happens next is one of the most logistically precise, legally complicated, and quietly invisible systems operating on the ocean today. And it runs so smoothly that the people eating dinner one deck above have absolutely no idea it's happening. Every large cruise ship is, in the most literal sense, a floating city. Royal Caribbean's Wonder of the Seas stretches over 1,000 feet from bow to stern, weighs over 220,000 tons when fully loaded, and carries more people than many small American towns. And like any town, it has a birth rate problem in reverse. People die on cruise ships. Regularly, not because the ships are dangerous, because the math is unavoidable. Statistically, on a week-long voyage carrying 6,000 people, the same actuarial math that governs a mid-sized county fair applies. You take any random group of 6,000 Americans, put them together for 7 days, and the numbers say someone isn't making it to the end. Some of those passengers are elderly. Some are seriously ill. Some boarded the ship not knowing their heart was already failing. The cruise industry carries roughly 23 million passengers a year. The number of deaths at sea is not zero, not even close. The industry doesn't advertise this, but it planned for it, down to the refrigeration unit. The moment a death is suspected, the ship's medical center activates. This isn't a first aid room with a cot and some bandages. Modern cruise ship infirmaries on vessels like the Oasis of the Seas or the Norwegian Bliss carry ventilators, defibrillators, digital X-ray equipment, full surgical capability, a pharmacy, and a licensed physician on staff around the clock. The medical center on a large ship looks closer to a rural emergency room than anything you'd expect to find floating in the Gulf of Mexico. The ship's doctor conducts the examination. They check for signs of life, review any medical history on file, and assess the scene. If death is confirmed, they pronounce it officially. Time, location, and circumstances all go into the record immediately. That single act triggers a chain reaction of paperwork that would make a county coroner's office look simple. Because here's the problem. The ship is in international waters. No single country owns that patch of ocean. And the legal identity of the deceased, the physical location of the death, the nationality of the ship's flag, and the next port of call can each fall under a completely different legal system. The doctor isn't just filling out a death certificate. They're filling out a document that needs to satisfy the laws of potentially 3 or 4 nations simultaneously before the ship ever ties up at a dock. Now here's where most people's instincts fire completely wrong. Your first thought, almost certainly, is that the ship stops, that it turns around, that a death at sea triggers some kind of emergency halt, a solemn pause, a rerouting toward the nearest port so the body can be taken ashore and the family can grieve on solid ground. It doesn't. Almost never. And the reasoning is brutally, coldly logical. Diverting a 100,000-ton vessel off its published course costs somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000 in fuel alone, before you add port fees, unscheduled docking charges, and contractual penalties to the ports that were expecting the ship on a fixed schedule. It disrupts the travel plans of nearly 6,000 people who booked flights, hotel rooms, and shore excursions at the next destination. It delays the ship's next scheduled departure and cascades through the booking system like a dropped wrench, falling into a running engine. And here is the part that makes the decision feel almost cruel until you think it through completely. It offers zero benefit to the person who died. None. Diverting the ship does not change the outcome for the deceased. The destination doesn't reverse what happened. The only thing a diversion accomplishes is inconveniencing thousands of living people while adding enormous cost to an event that is already a tragedy. So the ship continues, The engines keep turning at their cruising speed of roughly 22 miles per hour. The buffet stays open. The pool deck fills up after lunch. And somewhere below the waterline, a few decks below the sound of a live band playing by the atrium bar, the process moves to its next phase. Every major cruise ship carries a morgue. Most passengers will complete a dozen cruises in their lifetime and never know this room exists. It typically holds between 3 and 6 individual body storage bays, each one refrigerated and secured. The morgue is located in the lower decks of the ship, positioned near the medical center for obvious logistical reasons, and completely separated from any passenger-facing area. There are no windows nearby, no foot traffic, no signage pointing the way. The body is transferred there under strict chain of custody protocols. Every movement is documented. Every person present is recorded by name and role. The time of transfer is logged. The condition on arrival is noted. The paperwork has to be airtight, not because the cruise line is being cautious, but because when this ship docks, multiple government agencies will be waiting, and any gap in the documentation chain can freeze the entire process for days and create legal liability that stretches across international borders. Think of it like evidence handling in a criminal case, except the evidence is someone's father, and it has to clear customs. While the body is secured, the ship's guest services team is already handling the human side of the situation. The family is moved to a quieter area. A senior crew member, usually a hotel director or a guest relations officer with specific bereavement training, sits with them. In many cases, the family is offered a cabin upgrade or a private lounge space away from the main passenger areas. The cruise line shoreside emergency response team is notified and begins coordinating with the family's home contacts, their travel insurance provider, and the relevant consular offices. None of this happens loudly. None of it interrupts the experience of the other passengers. That is entirely deliberate. The legal architecture sitting underneath all of this is genuinely strange. A cruise ship flying a Panamanian flag, carrying an American passenger, sailing through Bahamian waters, heading toward a port in Cozumel, Mexico, exists in a jurisdictional gray zone that took decades of international maritime law to even partially resolve. The flag state, in this case Panama, holds primary legal authority over events that occur aboard the vessel. The captain operates under Panamanian maritime regulations, even though neither the ship, the crew, nor a single passenger may have any other connection to Panama whatsoever. This is not an accident. Ships register under flags of convenience in Panama, the Bahamas, and Liberia, specifically because those flag states offer favorable tax treatment, lighter regulatory burdens, and streamlined administrative requirements. It is a deliberately constructed legal architecture, and it is completely standard across the entire global cruise industry. When someone dies, that architecture doesn't disappear. It becomes the framework that governs everything. The captain becomes, in a very real legal sense, a reporting officer to a government most of the passengers couldn't point to on a map. The captain's obligations from that moment forward are extensive. Notify the flag state authority immediately. Notify the deceased next of kin directly and with care. Notify the port authorities at the next scheduled stop so they can prepare for the arrival and coordinate the appropriate agencies in advance. If the passenger was a citizen of a country with consular notification requirements, coordinate with that consulate. Preserve all documentation without alteration. Ensure the deceased's cabin and belongings are secured and inventoried. In cases where the death appears anything other than natural, those protocols tighten dramatically. The ship's security team, which on a large vessel can number in the dozens, logs every access to the relevant areas. The doctor's notes become a formal legal record. Statements may be taken from crew members or witnesses. The ship does not become a crime scene in the dramatic television sense, but it does become a jurisdiction, and the captain is responsible for maintaining the integrity of that jurisdiction until shoreside authorities take over. And through all of it, the ship keeps moving. When the vessel finally pulls into port, The operation shifts from maritime law to municipal procedure. Port health authorities board the ship before most passengers are even awake. Local medical examiners or their representatives are notified. In cases involving American citizens dying abroad, the United States Consular Office in that country has often already been in contact with the ship's operations team since the night before arrival. Funeral homes that hold established contracts with major cruise lines receive a quiet notification call the evening before docking. They know what time to arrive, which entrance to use, and what paperwork to bring. This is not improvised. These relationships exist precisely because this situation is not rare. The removal happens early, before the gangways open for disembarking passengers, before the vendors set up on the pier, before anyone is lining up with their beach bags and their shore excursion vouchers. A service entrance, a crew corridor, a loading area on the lower hull that passengers never see. The kind of infrastructure that exists on every large ship and that most people walk past 100 times during a voyage without ever registering what it is actually for. Legal custody transfers from the ship's captain to the local authority with a signature. The ship's internal documentation closes out, and somewhere on a quiet section of that pier, a process that started 3 days ago in the middle of open ocean finishes with a handshake and a sealed case file. Back on the ship, the cabin is cleaned and turned over by housekeeping following a specific protocol. The medical center logs are updated and filed. The chain of custody documentation is archived, and the 5,799 remaining passengers finish their breakfast, collect their shore excursion wristbands, and walk down the gangway into the sunshine, most of them completely unaware that the floating city they have been living in just executed one of the most complex administrative, legal, and logistical sequences a vessel can be asked to perform. That is the thing about a system this well engineered. You only notice it when it fails, and on a modern cruise ship, it almost never fails. What it makes you wonder is what happens when the situation is worse. Not a quiet death in a cabin, a crisis with a clock running, a passenger who collapses on the pool deck with a heart attack 250 miles from the nearest hospital, a scuba diver pulled to the surface too fast, nitrogen bubbling into their bloodstream, with a treatment window measured in hours, an emergency surgery that cannot wait for port. The ships have answers for all of those too, and some of them involve a Coast Guard helicopter, a rescue swimmer on a winch cable dropping onto a moving deck in 20-knot winds, and a ship's surgeon making decisions that no medical school curriculum fully prepares you for. If you want to understand how that works, stick around. That system is just as invisible, just as precisely engineered, and just as worth knowing about